You're very welcome back. Joe Molloy with you this evening, and Mick Foley of the Sunday Times is with us to take a look back, Mick, at the men's inter-county football year that was. You're very welcome. How you doing?
Good, Joe. How are you?
I'm great. Happy Christmas and all that.
Yeah, many happy returns to you and all the off-the-ball people, the AM people and the PM people.
There's a lot of people.
There's a lot of people, a lot more than there used to be. It's great to see.
So, listen, good to be going in the right direction. So, well, I don't know how you want to review the year that was. I haven't forced you to do something very mechanical, like pick out your X number of highlights or lowlights. In some respects, we should start with the Dubs, because they came in here, obviously, off the back of unparalleled success. And the question mark was, would they be able to keep it going? So I guess an interesting point to jump in on. I mean, one of the images of the year is in March 2021 when people opened up their Irish Independent. Didn't even have to open it up, Mick. It was front page news.
Right there for you.
And there were the Dubs. It was right there for you. Breaking the training ban. Within 24, certainly 48 hours top, Dessie Farrell had been banned for 12 weeks. Dublin County Board apologising unreservedly. A serious error of judgment. Now, their most recent County Board report suggests that it was much ado about nothing. But back then, they apologised unreservedly. And I suppose that's not the reason they didn't win the All-Ireland, I would suspect. But it seemed to just kick off a tricky year for Dessie Farrell and co.
It was just had a destabilising effect, I think, on the whole thing. You know, I mean, I don't think a group of players of that calibre who would have been held in that high regard throughout the entirety of their time dominating the football championship and the way they were being spoken of as, you know, greatest team of all time, most successful team of all time, some of the greatest players we'll ever see, etc., etc. And, you know, obviously, look, we never heard much of the Dubs, I suppose, in the media, but when you did, they were always very, very impressive. So to go from that to see them, to see some of them training, you know, so close to the time when they could go back training, which I suppose is one thing, but that's almost beside the point. The very fact that they were doing it at all, to make that, frankly, boneheaded decision to do that, it just planted a seed of doubt. I would imagine it probably, the fact that they weren't all there, you would think that, well, not everybody was in favour of doing it in the first place. So then you start to think, well, what are the kind of conversations that are going on within that group? You start to look at some of the players that were missing and go, oh, what's the story? And, you know, I mean, if people out here are looking at that and asking those questions, some of those questions and conversations are going to be had within the camp as well. And, you know, it would have sort of encouraged, let's say, other teams as well, that, okay, the gap is there. Dublin were the favourites starting the championship. And look, even down as far as the All-Ireland semi-final against Mayo, let's not forget, they did get that far and it went to extra time. And I would say that probably the best 25 minutes of football I saw all year in the championship, certainly, was Dublin in the first half against Mayo. So without wanting to throw the baby out with the bathwater, you know, they did get that far. But certainly, I think it had a destabilising effect. And what impact it had on the Stephen Cluxton situation, we may never know. But certainly I would have thought it would be very unusual if it didn't have a destabilising effect, to be honest.
Well, to lose your manager for 12 weeks. And then there were other things bubbling away. The Stephen Cluxton situation was bizarre.
Well, it was very, it was. And I mean, again, we're not privy to what's going on in the inside of these camps, but certainly looking from the outside in, you'd be saying, well, look, Stephen Cluxton was always the kind of player who you knew was just going to walk away. He was going to do, it reminded me of Maurice Fitzgerald many years ago. Like, there wasn't going to be a grand retirement. He's just going to not be there someday, and that'll be it, you know. So when it got to the point where he wasn't there, I suppose, you know, and I don't think it's hindsight. I think this was probably the logic at the time as well, was that, you know, in fairness to Evan Comerford, in fairness to Dessie, in fairness to everybody, you know, the manager needed to have a conversation with the goalkeeper and say, look, can we make a decision here and we can all move on? You know, I mean, you've been a great servant, etc., you know yourself. It should have happened. But instead, you had this sort of narrative, and it wasn't even the kind of way that, well, it's distracting from their form, because it wasn't. It was just part of a wider conversation about their form. So it wasn't really serving any positive purpose. And again, you know, these guys live in a bubble, but they do have to go about their daily lives. You know, I mean, they may be entirely cosseted, cosseted away from the media, but they're not cosseted away from the public. So they're listening to this the whole time, and lads are asking, what's the story with Cluxton and all this? You know, and it gets wearing, you know, just hearing the same thing all the time. So obviously, look, it would have been far better from a Dublin perspective, I think, from what we know, if that had been clarified a little bit better. And again, it's just, as you say, it's just all part of a year that was just very messy. And, you know, Paul Mannion isn't there again. Obviously, Jack McCaffrey wasn't there for a second season. And, you know, guys are retiring, starting to look at the first 15 is still, you know, top 2 material. But the bench is obviously not as luxurious as it once was. And that's, you know, that was always where Dublin did their damage, you know, and that's how it kind of transpired.
Because I remember listening to Paul Flynn towards the end of the season, and he said something very interesting. He noticed even against lesser opposition, if the other team were counter-attacking or having a reasonable passage of play, Dublin were giving away cheap fouls. They were just stopping the move at source. And he said, under Jim Gavin, that was not allowed. You had to get back and do the hard work and stop them, quote unquote, honestly, without sacrificing your discipline. And Flynn was just detecting these, you know, minute slippages in standards, I suppose, which didn't stop Dublin still winning most of their games by 10 or 15 points. But he detected something there, which I thought was very interesting. I couldn't say it jumped out massively to me. I mean, certainly in a lot of games, they weren't as clinical as they had been, but there was a degree of almost, well, you'd forgive them that, you know, at this stage. And maybe it is hard to just get your juices flowing to the same extent as previous years. And as you said, halftime against Mayo, Colin O'Rourke rightly told us it was over.
Well, I mean, at halftime, the All-Ireland semi-final, I think they were the 7 up or something like that. And I was
6,
you know, the conversation.
10 points to 4. 10 points to 4.
10 points to 4, 6 up. So I was like, yeah, this is going to, Mayo are going to push back. Dublin are going to push on again. It's going to end up a 4 or 5 point win. Dublin kind of putting up. But like, even the way you're talking there, you know, we're talking in the context of let's get one last squeeze. You know what I mean? It's like they're getting by, they get there, they get there. And, you know, it was funny because like the way the year panned out, this is partly, I suppose, I wasn't entirely COVID related, but I actually ended up watching an awful lot of games down south. I saw an awful lot of Kerry compared to Dublin now. Before the All-Ireland semi-final, in the flesh, I saw an awful lot of Kerry compared to Dublin. And I was having conversations with people who were watching them in the flesh, and I was going, geez, they can't be that bad. And people who were watching them were going, yeah, they are. There's severe slippage. They talked about discipline. They talked about how various players were being used and their work rate and stuff. You know, all the basic stuff that in a different time, it was just there, present and correct on the day. And I mean, coming into the Mayo game, there was grave. I mean, I came up going, yeah, look, they're obviously depleted. They're not where they were a couple of years ago, but they'll get by. But I have to say, the second half was, it took my breath away for all the wrong reasons watching them. I couldn't get over it, you know. I mean, obviously I'd watched the games on TV and watched the videos back and all the rest of it. But to see it, you know, the discipline falling apart, you know, again, looking at players kind of not getting back, whether it was fatigue or a sort of just that drain that comes with so many years going to the well. And I mean, even if Dublin are walking Leinster Championships, Joe, and all that kind of stuff, they still have to uphold their own standards for 9 months of the year, most of the time, before 2022 anyway, to win an All-Ireland. So that's a long old stretch. So
one last one on the Dubs then. I think it'd be foolish to write them off to any great degree. Cluxton, still a question mark. Would you be shocked? It'd be a very Cluxton thing, wouldn't it, just to surprise us all and jog out for a league game and no fanfare beforehand? But there's the Cluxton situation to an extent. I think it's done. There's the McCaffrey situation, Jack McCaffrey. There's Paul Mannion. And then you've got the next cohort, the likes of Mick Fitzsimons, who's 33 next year, Johnny Cooper, who's 32, James McCarthy, 31, Dean Rock, 31. These are, you know, still pretty close to peak of their career, but starting to creep. And then you've got the batch below them, Kieran Kilkenny, John Small, Brian Fenton, all 29 next year, which is still a very good age. And Desi Farrell with the big point to prove, and the team, I would say, with the big point to prove. So the interesting question is going to be 2021, the kick up the ass that inspired another 3 in a row, or we really will have a line in the sand?
It's hard to know. I mean, I think in terms of I'd agree with you on the Cluxton situation. I'd be very surprised if he came back. Mannion, McCaffrey, I think, again, the soundings and the sense you get is that Paul Mannion won't be back. Certainly no sign of Jack McCaffrey coming back. So, you know, do unbelievable losses, absolutely unbelievable losses. And as you say, the other guys, maybe it is. I mean, the likes of James McCarthy, he has absolutely nothing left to prove. But at the same time, he didn't end last year's championship in the way he would have wanted. And I'm sure there's a drive there in him just to give it one last go, maybe a second last go, who knows. But there will be a pride among those guys, and they set standards, and they've set standards for a decade that we have never seen in football before. Also, we don't want to get into the whole funding thing and all that carry on, but I would have always been of the view that we are looking at an extraordinary group of players here. And I mean, when you say, the likes of Kenny and them are heading for 29, I mean, that makes me feel old anyway. But I mean, it's just, it's extraordinary to think that, this team is their team. It's the team of Con, it's the team of Kilkenny, it's the team of Fenton now. And that core, along with a couple of others, is still good enough to win in All-Ireland. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But it's just whether the depth is there. I don't think there's any doubt that the group that are coming up behind them are nowhere near as good as what has been, creating that 21 man game, whatever. So it's going to be whether they can do it next year. And look, we could be here this time next year looking back going, weren't they just like Kerry in the 80s, getting a kick up the ass from Offaly and then a kick up the ass from Cork and coming back and winning 3 in a row. I'm not sure it'll work out that way, but who knows? It makes things interesting.
Yeah, I think it will work out that way. So we'll talk. We'll reconvene in a year. I think Dublin will win the Ireland next year, and I think they'll win it with anger. We'll talk in a year. Can I ask you about something then? We don't need to labour this point. There's nothing more that needs to be said about this, and yet we have to mention it because for a lot of the summer, unfortunately, this was the overarching theme, which was hammerings being dished out. So to jog some memories, Mayo against Leitrim was 5-20 to 11 points. That was a 24-point hammering. Meath beat Longford by 22 points. Limerick played Waterford 4-18 to 12 points, an 18-point win. Kerry dished out a few. You said you were watching Kerry. So against Clare, and a good Clare team, they beat them by 17 points, 322 to 111. And then I think where people really thought, God, this is just interminable, was when they beat Cork as well, like a Munster final fresh from the ambush of the previous year. Kerry 422, Cork 1-9. Ulster by and large was very good. Armagh beat Antrim by 13 points. But in the main, Ulster upheld its end of the bargain. But that, I mean, I remember numerous Mondays on the show chatting to various pundits after different weekends and saying, there's none for us to talk about here. Like, this is just hollow as it gets. And that brings us to proposal B, 85 in favour and 83 against of the delegates. And that late push by Larry McCarthy and John Horan, like almost on was it the Thursday of the vote? This weird, very late push. Why they didn't do it 2-3 weeks earlier, I don't know. But what do we say about this that we haven't said a million times before? It was such a big part of the season.
It was. And I mean, look, for me watching it, there was a point in the season, it was around the weekend of the All-Ireland semi-finals. The week before that, I was thinking, is this the worst championship I've ever seen? And when I kind of went back and kind of worked through it, I think it's the worst championship I can recall since 1999. Right. Like, I counted, to that point, before the All-Ireland football semi-finals, I counted maybe 4 games that you say were very good. Right. The 2 Ulster semi-finals were very good. Offaly and Louth, I'm told, played an absolute zinger in the first round of Leinster. There were obviously very good passages in matches, but by and large, it was poor stuff. As you say, like, I mean, look, Mayo and Kerry won their provincial championships, both of them, by an aggregate of 100 points this year. The 4 provincial champions altogether, it was like 137 or something. Like, that's way up on what you'd normally expect, even for the provincial championships. Like, in a way, I'm no fan of the knockout system, never have been, never will be. But maybe in its own way, it was a wake-up call for a new generation to say, lads, this stuff, it ain't romantic. It's just rubbish. It doesn't work. It's not a way forward in any way, shape or form. So even the All-Ireland semi-finals, they were held up by drama, really. I mean, I would still maintain that Dublin Mayo was a poor game apart from what Dublin produced. And then it was character after that. And Tyrone Kerry was a dog of a game. But because it was just so dramatic and the way it swung around and the way Tyrone pulled it off at the end, it'll live in the memory. But it was a dog of a match as far as I'm concerned. So even the good stuff wasn't great. In terms of going forward, look, I think it's often the way in these things. the way the championship has been discussed and the way it's the way Proposal B was dealt with reminded me very, very much of the backdoor system when it was brought in back in 2000. It was initially a very radical looking championship change they were going to make. That was knocked out of the park, and they came back with a new committee with county secretaries and stuff on it, and came back with a more conservative but still, effective way to change up the championship a bit. So I think we're seeing that happening again. I mean, we've gone from Proposal A and Proposal B now to option green and option red. I think I saw somewhere in one of the newspapers this week. So even that's wrecking my head. But it seems, I think between whether we go green or red, and why it has to be green and red, I'd like to know as well. But anyway, either way it goes, I think it does enough to satisfy the worries around, well, will the provincial championships get cut adrift? Personally, I would like to see I suppose the principal difference, I suppose, is the red option. You get divisions 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B. I think that the way the Football League has been structured for years has done more to create a gap between teams than people really get. People go, it's the best competition, it's the most relevant competition. It is, but it's like, as a league, it's completely overgrown itself. So you either use it, as the centerpiece of the championship and don't worry too much about the provincials, or you do something with it. But anyway, look, I think the two proposals, and they're going to pick one of them for Congress next year. I think whichever one they pick will get through this time round. I think you mentioned there about the push from the hierarchy in the run up to the special Congress. To me, that was it was a bit of a nudge, because I think what they really wanted, I think what the hierarchy wanted, GPA and everybody involved wanted, was an acceptance that change needed to happen. They didn't want the debate to fall on its ass. So they needed that push to keep the thing alive. But in terms of an actual solution, I'm not so sure they were happy with Proposal B itself.
Okay. September 11th, 2021, Kerry Tyrone. And this was good because we'd had Dublin Mayo, which is just extraordinary. And then there was this, like, this is what you want in championship, isn't it? Like the talk of Tyrone and the ambush, and it's all set up for them. But then again, Kerry have been so good. But then again, it's Tyrone. And that's not to mention the COVID controversy. So let's hand over here for a moment to Messrs Spillane and Kavanagh.
Kerry have a reputation of being Q-tours, and it's something we have earned over years, that tag of Q-tour. But to be quite honest, when you see another crowd acting the Q-tour and being even better at it than us, and that was Tyrone, and I'll tell you why. Because what Tyrone did...
Let Pat finish and then you come back in, Sean.
I'll tell you what Tyrone did. Tyrone played an absolute blinder. They called the game, they called the Jay's bluff, they called Kerry's bluff, they played a game of poker, they hurled a grenade in, and the J blinked and Kerry blinked. And I'll tell you, you talk about anger and you talk about people not knowing facts. Of course people don't know facts, because no one has taught anything. And when you have a vacuum of information, as you had...
Would you want Tyrone to come here with 20 players?
No, just bear with me. Just bear with me and listen to facts. Right, I'm just asking you, when there's a vacuum of information, as there was from the Tyrone camp, right? There was a vacuum of information. Into that vacuum, will you just please, when there's a vacuum, into that vacuum comes misinformation, false narratives, innuendo, and that's what you got.
It's beautiful stuff.
We can laugh now. I tell you what, though, Joe, I'd say you'd love if the rugby analyst went off like that some February, Saturday, wouldn't you?
Yes, I would. I mean, absolutely. I'll try and stoke it. I need to stoke it more.
Just hop a few balls.
I just want someone screaming medical records. If that hasn't happened in February, come back to me next March. That's the aim. So what do we say about Tyrone then? For Dooher and Logan to go and do this and to beat Cavan, to beat Donegal, to beat Monaghan, to beat Kerry, to beat Mayo, that's a hell of an achievement, and lots of things linger in the memory. You used the word character, and it was a dogfight, and of course that was made for them. And then you think of McShane off the bench, and you think of their energy levels, which was the big question mark. And it's an astonishing performance, really, because I've been hearing about Tyrone for a few years now, and they're coming, and I never quite bought it.
Yeah, it's like worthy champions, first of all. I mean, set aside whatever the whys and wherewithals of the COVID controversy and how it was handled and all the rest of it, worthy champions. What was different? Like, even if you looked at the makeup of the team, it wasn't that different to the Mickey Hart version. probably what was different was they obviously got more off their bench is one thing, and just a handful of players just went to another level this year. And I was at the Killarney game. I was at the Tyrone Kerry League game. I swear to God, like I came back from that, and people can get coy and clever about league matches and that, but I tell you what, you'd be playing for personal pride on a day like that if you were from Tyrone and it falling apart below in Killarney and you were getting absolutely humiliated. You would be playing for your pride, and even that wasn't working for them. I really came away going, this is one of the worst Tyrone performances I've ever seen. To take it from there to where they brought it to when the next time they met Kerry, the cleverness of their play, the aggression, and the opportunity, most importantly of all, particularly in a knockout year, to take the chance when it came, I mean, even going into extra time in that game with David Clifford off and Kerry were roaring at them, you kind of still felt, geez, Kerry have a chance here all the way along, but Tyrone never blinked, It was a classic sort of Tyrone. And that's not to downgrade or downplay the quality of their play. I mean, Derek Hanovan coming off the bench, McShane as an option off the bench, Niall Sludden, these guys were outstanding. Conor Myler was outstanding in a different way to the others. Like even, and I think in our lifetimes, will we ever see, I hope we don't, I hope it doesn't come to it, that we'll ever see a team actually take themselves out of the championship, to try and get themselves back into it, if you know what I mean. And I can tell you this much, I think the only team in Ireland that would ever have done it is Tyrone. It was the most Tyrone thing ever Tyrone, was to take themselves out of the championship so they can come back in and be ready, and they were ready and, absolutely worthy winners of the thing. And it's the same when they came up against Mayo in the final and Mayo didn't get to the heights that they needed to get. Tyrone were damn ready. And I mean, I was terrific. It was terrific.
Yeah, no, I agree totally. Astonishing performance. Yeah. So if you're saying Tyrone, it was the most Tyrone thing ever, there are Mayo fans right now saying, well, you want to see the most Mayo thing ever? Have a look at our season. So we've about 2 minutes here. So can you give me 30-40 seconds on very long winters in Mayo and Kerry each? Where are these two after this year?
Well, I think Mayo have to be kind of pragmatic enough to look at the team they have, look at the depth of squad they have, look what they've come from in the last 2 years. It was their poorest performance in All-Ireland for quite a while, but think of where they've come in the last decade in terms of setting the bar. Right, so that's I don't think, I mean, it's been doom and gloom in Mayo and absolute ridiculous stuff going on out there. They don't need to be that ridiculous. From a Kerry point of view, they have things to think about now. They have Jack O'Connor in there. He's a proven winner as a manager. I'm sure he'll bring a different edge, a different kind of sense to the whole thing. But there are individual players there, still young, mind, but there are individual players in there who need to make a decision now in terms of where they want to go next to their careers and what they want to bring to the thing. And that's not to say they're not giving it everything, but there is always another little bit to give when you're not getting to where Kerry want to be. So, big questions for Kerry. It's gas, isn't it? Do we think that the big questions at the end of this year will be faced by Kerry, Dublin and Mayo compared to anybody else?
Yeah. Mick Foley of the Sunday Times. I really enjoyed that, Mick. Thanks a mil.
Pleasure. All the best.